Chair, members of the committee, I'm Scott Schneider representing the Kansas Restaurant and Hospitality Association. It is on. It's blue anyway. I'd like to introduce a bill with a RS number 21 RS 1189, and it puts into law the carry-out and curbside that we've had in executive orders. It would make that permanent, and in addition to that, it would allow for third-party delivery of that drinking establishment alcohol product. Stand for any questions if you have any.
Are there any questions? Yes, Senator Falscado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Scott, so third party, who would be that third party?
Traditionally, the players in that space, you could do it yourself, but the third party would be Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub, those players in that space, yeah.
Senator Peterson.
Is there a requirement in the bill that the people delivering it be of legal age to have the alcohol?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Are there any objections to introducing the bill? Seeing no, the bill will be introduced. Thank you. Next, we have Senator Falscado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bill introduction for concerning motor vehicles relating to distinctive license plates. The number is 21 RS 0876. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions on this introduction? Any objections to this introduction? Seeing none, the bill will be introduced. Committee members, you should have received email for the committee minutes for January 12th, 13th, 14th, 21st, 26th, 27th, and 28th, and February 2nd and 3rd. And they were distributed on February 9th. And so I'd entertain a motion for approval of these minutes at this time. It's moved, seconded, moved by Senator Longbine, seconded by Senator Falscado. All in favor? Aye. Minutes are approved. Now we will continue our hearing on Senate Bill 84, which is authorizing sports wagering under the Kansas Expanded Lottery Act. Do we have any updated information from Mr. Long?
No, Mr. Chairman, I don't have any updates for the committee at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to the neutrals, and we have Mr. John Goodyear, staff attorney for the League of Kansas Municipalities. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good morning. My name is John Goodyear, and I'm staff attorney with the League of Kansas Municipalities, and I truly am grateful for the opportunity to come before you today and give testimony regarding, neutral testimony regarding Senate Bill 84. If you were in committee last year, if you went back and listened to the hearings from last year, my testimony today is largely going to echo what I said last year. The League truly does not have a position. We truly are neutral regarding whether or not sports gaming should be legalized in the state. However, we would ask that as the committee gives thought to legalizing it, that a share of revenue for local government entities be considered. So in current law, gaming facilities contribute 3% of their revenue to local government entities. And this percentage is given as a means to help local governments offset the costs, the increased costs to local government that are associated with having a gaming facility in their neighborhood. As written, Senate Bill 84 excludes revenue from sports wagering from the definition of lottery gaming facility revenue, and no provision is made elsewhere in the legislation for local governments to receive a share of that revenue produced by sports wagers. Sports wagering, I think we all know this, it's something that many people in the state they want to see it passed, and when it does, I don't think it's a matter of if anymore. I think it is truly a matter of when. It's going to be an activity that many Kansans take advantage of, and residents of neighboring states are going to be taking advantage of it as well. And we expect that the traffic to these facilities is going to increase as a product of this legislation. Increased traffic to these facilities means increased cost to local government, and we would request that as this committee works this bill, as it moves forward, that a provision be made for local governments giving a proportional share, not necessarily the same share, not necessarily that 3%, because I do recognize that the state is taking a reduced share in comparative to what they take in the rest of the facility. And we would be happy to talk about taking a proportional share to reduced to reflect what the state is also taking as well. So just thank you for the opportunity to voice these concerns of our member cities, and we would ask that the issue of a local share be considered as you consider the bill. And Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Deb, I'm muted. Deb, are you online? And if so, unmute.
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman Alley. It's a pleasure to be here. Members of the committee, my name is Deb Stidham. I'm here today representing the Kansas Association of Addiction Professionals, which is an addiction prevention and treatment provider trade association, which has been in existence since 1974. And our membership includes agencies located all over the state, providing an array of services from outpatient to residential and prevention services. So an estimated 46,000 adults in Kansas are believed to suffer from a gambling disorder. And the 2017 Kansas Gambling Survey determined that nearly 3% of Kansas adults would be considered high risk for suffering from a gambling disorder. Now, we know that this population is 10 to 15 times more likely to attempt suicide, and the co-occurring rates for mental illness and substance use disorders is significant. In addition, seniors and our youth are also very vulnerable to gambling problems. And unfortunately, many of these problems go undetected for many years until the problem has progressed to the point of criminal activity, bankruptcy, and suicide. So we believe that everyone who profits from sports betting bears some responsibility for addressing gambling problems. And the only way to maximize benefits from sports betting is to minimize problem gambling. The addition of sports betting into our state will certainly bring a blitz of advertising to urge Kansans to bet instantly from their phone on every action by every player, on every play, in every game, in every sport. The expansion of legalized sports gambling will likely increase gambling participation, and this will increase some problems. The dangers of this trend of advertising to access and action, though, can be mitigated, though, with a few measures. We need to ensure that there is at least 2% of net revenue dedicated to prevent and treat gambling addiction. We need robust and enforceable, responsible gaming programs for sports betting, licensees, and all gambling operators. Those programs are in existence today. It just needs the will for the state to enact them. We need to conduct surveys of the prevalence of gambling addiction prior to expansion and at regular periods thereafter to assess problems. We have some surveillance data now, but we need a lot more robust data to really understand the magnitude of what impact this kind of legislation can have on our state. We need to establish a consistent, enforceable minimum age for gambling. So there's best practices for state agencies, such as the Kansas Department of Aging and Disability Services, which is currently responsible for addressing problem gambling. And so those kinds of things include making sure that there's sufficient staff dedicated to oversee these programs. We need to put gambling screens into our intake and assessment and data tracking system. KDADS is already responsible for the entire publicly funded behavioral health system in Kansas. So to add some of these screening questions and things like that to address problem gambling, I cannot stress how underreported that these problems are. People can go through an entire residential treatment stay for their alcohol use disorder and never really talk about problem gambling. There's not screening and adequate training for the staff to understand the problems that can go along with these other issues. We need to add problem symptom questions to our surveillance monitoring and survey efforts. We need state and culturally specific basic materials on gambling addiction. The importance of prevention, public awareness around problem gambling. I mean, there are signs and symptoms that are easily, disseminated and talked about, but it takes money, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes resources to really educate folks about the problems that can come about and where to get help. We need to train all our mental health and addiction counselors in how to screen and assess. We need to help people have the education and certification to receive advanced training. We have some of that already in the state of Kansas. We have certified gambling counselors, but we need to invest more. An evaluation of KDEDs by these measures and addressing any gaps found should occur prior to any expansion of legalized gambling. So the National Council on Problem Gambling did a survey of problem gambling services. And so this is a national organization, and they go into state budgets and they look at how much money is being devoted, if there is any money for problem gambling devoted to addressing these issues. So Kansas, we devote about $889,000 a year to address problem gambling out of the Problem Gambling Fund. And this is about 31 cents per capita, which is below the average of 37. So we're about 16th out of 40 states. Delaware is the highest at $1.46. So you can see we have some room to grow here. So the Kansas Expanded Lottery Act recognized the state's duty to address problem gambling in 2007. That was when we decided to have casinos. And when it stipulated that 2% of net revenues be allocated to the Problem Gambling and Addiction Fund. Unfortunately, this fund has not been fully utilized for its intended purpose, which was to fund the research, prevention, and treatment of problem gambling and other addictions. The legislature understood two things. The alcohol and drug field is severely underfunded and always has been. And that with the co-occurring nature and with the tendency in this state and others for the alcohol and drug field to kind of be some of the folks that do a lot of the treatment of problem gamblers, that we needed to beef up that system as well. So if you take a close look at those funds, you'll see that this intent has never been realized. So KEP's recommendation is that the legislation to legalize sports betting in our state should not only include language that dedicates at least 2% of net revenues for the Problem Gambling and Addiction Fund, but also to fix the language in that statute to ensure that all revenues be allocated for their intended purpose. So in 2020, an amendment was proposed and adopted on SB 283 in the Kansas Senate during Senate floor debate, incorporating these changes. The importance of this amendment cannot be understated when you consider, again, the legislature in 2007 really wasn't all that jazzed about expanding gaming in Kansas, but they understood that if they were going to do it, that this would be a way to mitigate the harms by the 2% fund. But due to a series of economic factors, those funds were diverted early on to meet state budget challenges. So we need to amend not only this bill, but also the Kansas Expanded Lottery Act. So we urge you to do that in the same fashion as occurred in 2020 SB 283. Thank you very much for your time and consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Deb. Are there any questions? Yes, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deb, do you know how this bill has $100,000 going to the Problem Gaming Fund? How does that compare to 2% of the expected net revenues? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know that.
Jason, would you know?
No, we'd have to check on that because I don't think there are good numbers as to exactly how much revenue sports wagering is going to bring into the state. We have some estimates so far, but it's difficult to pin down hard numbers moving forward.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Yes, Senator Falscadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, what are some of your estimations that you have?
I would defer to the Kansas Lottery or some of the proponents on this bill as to what their estimates are. Those folks who work in this industry regularly. I know they've presented information in the past on what their anticipated possible revenues for sports wagering and what that would be for the state and past committees. I don't have the information right at my fingertips right now.
Do we have someone from Revenue here that are online that might be able to give us the fiscal note? We'll continue to look for that. I'd like to go back to Deb while we're trying to find that fiscal note. Deb, are you online? Deb, could you
They
unmute
muted
again?
me. I apologize. Go ahead,
Okay.
Chairman.
We had a hearing or a briefing from talked about problem gambling and how much money we had in that account. It seems that right now the 2% that's bringing in from the casinos at this time is over $8 million. And you had stated that we're spending $889,000 a year. Is that correct?
Correct. That is the amount out of that fund that is being used to address specifically problem gambling prevention and treatment.
The proposal that, or not the proposal, the information that we received in that briefing was that that number is actually $263,000 that is coming out of that 2% from the casinos. The rest of the money is spent on other addiction. The question that I have is what number does that need to be for problem gambling?
So Chairman, the last time that I was familiar with the revenues coming out of that fund, and that is the number that I remember as well, around $8 to $9 million. Really, so how it was utilized, and I believe is still occurring, we were in not only a recession, but also we went through tremendous budget cuts right as the casinos were being built and the revenue started coming in. So the decision to divert that funding basically to offset Medicaid match for the behavioral health system was made to keep from having to use state general fund. The intent, because I used to work in state government during this time, and the intent from the legislature that was to actually fund the alcohol and drug treatment system to add to the state funding that is currently being allocated. We usually refer that to the block grant, which is a combination of federal and state funds, not to use that money to basically supplant other funds, because the idea was to add to the funding in the alcohol and drug system, and that just never happened.
So do you think that with the funding that you have today, are you making progress to reduce the amount of problem gambling in the state?
I believe much more could be done, Chairman. If you go into other states that have invested in problem gambling efforts in a more robust and really consistent manner, there's many more things we can do to get the word out to people, to screen. Part of the problem and some of the criticism that the fund gets is because the numbers of people actually accessing problem gambling treatment is fairly low, but that is not indicative of the number of people who need treatment. That's indicative of the number of people that we actually found and identified and knew about the services that we were able to get into treatment. We need much more robust efforts to educate the public about these issues. My next door neighbor should know how to receive problem gambling treatment. And I can about guarantee you they do not. Because those things take money, that takes time, and prevention efforts are never, they're never urgent, right? Like treatment is, or an emergency room type care. Those things are urgent. Prevention takes a value system and a concerted effort to get the word out and to educate. And there's much more we can do just with our publicly funded treatment system to help our counselors understand these issues and to help people get the help that they need.
We appreciate your input. Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Deb, you believe the amendment that was offered on the Senate floor last year on 283 that created the lockbox and allowed for the co-occurring behaviors would address a lot of these issues?
Yes, we're in support of that, those changes from last year.
Thank you. I do have a part of testimony that we received. The Kansas Lottery indicates that the industry analysis predict the sports wagering will see substantial growth within the next 5 years, and it could reach $900 million in gross wagering within those 5 years, which would generate approximately $5.3 million for the state of Kansas. So 2% of that would be similar to your $100,000. So, is there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Deb. We're going to move on to, we do have written testimony for neutral only, and that should be in your packet, and that's from Russell Bryan from he's outside counsel for Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. Any other neutral testimony? I don't see anybody else. So we'll move on to opponents. And the first opponent we have is Tom Pallas, but I understand Tom is testifying. So we have Becky Schwartz with us today. Becky, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Clearly, I'm not Tom Pallas. I am Becky Schwartz. I'm the Associate Executive Director for Fuel True Independent Energy and Convenience. Formerly, we were the Petroleum Marketers and Convenience Store Association. We represent energy marketers and convenience stores throughout the state of Kansas. Thank you for letting me fill in for Tom. Over 1,100 Kansas convenience retailers are the backbone for games hosted by the Kansas Lottery that generate millions of dollars to the state. We are opposed to Senate Bill 84 because we believe that any game offered through the Kansas Lottery should be available to qualified retailers. This bill does not allow contracted lottery retailers. Sports wagering hosted by the Kansas Lottery is a natural fit for current lottery retailers. Retailers offering lottery tickets are currently contracted and have a financial track record with the Kansas Lottery. They also have sufficient resources to support activities to conduct the sports wagering. We do understand that to be eligible to participate in this, there may be some certification requirements by the Kansas Lottery, and we are totally fine with that. At this time, we have no idea how many retailers would participate, but we have several large state and national chains that have serious interest in it. If lottery retailers were permitted to offer sports wagering, then we would totally be in support of Senate Bill 84. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Senator Longbine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for being here today. I visited with Tom earlier and indicated he had another appointment. Right?
Yes, I think that was on purpose.
Surely not. My question is, under your testimony, it appears that you would prefer that we change the model to have lottery retailers. In the event of that model, who would take the risk of wins and losses on sports gaming?
I'm not 100% sure. I do believe the C-stores do that, but I think we discussed this last year, and I would have to check with Tom because I'm not 100% sure, Senator.
I think under that model, the taxpayers of the state of Kansas would take the risk, and I think that was the concern of the Senate last year in our position. We did not want to put the state at risk and have the state assuming the risk of wins and losses within sports gaming.
Further questions? Yes, Senator Fausto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, you mentioned that you're opposed to the legislation because retailers weren't included. So we've been hearing this bill for a while now. Did you previously ask that?
Yes, we have, Senator. We opposed this bill last year too in this format, and then we were proponents of the bill that was on the House side that we were in.
Any further questions? Yes, Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize, I'm not keeping up on what the House is doing over there. Do they have a sister bill to this? And
Yes,
is
we
it,
do.
are you guys included in that one?
Yes, we are.
Is there only one bill over in the House?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You don't have that House bill number, sorry.
Um,
Afterthought.
Don't. I can get it
Mr.
to you. I have
Chairman?
it on my phone.
Mr. Chairman, it's House Bill 2199.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Becky. The next opponent that we have would be Terry Humphreys, the Stray Dog Policy and Humane Society of the United States, and she is remote. Terry, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, thank you. Chairman Alley and members of the Senate Federal and State Affairs Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I appreciate the availability of this remote connection. I am Terry Humphrey, lobbyist for the Humane Society of the United States and Stray Dog Policy. Today, I am asking you to amend Senate Bill 84 on behalf of 39 animal welfare organizations across Kansas, and they are listed at the bottom of my testimony. These organizations do not oppose sports wagering legislation unless it permits wagering on greyhound races. As written, Senate Bill 84 only excludes sports betting on greyhound races that occur in Kansas and are regulated under the Kansas Parimutuel Racing Act. This bill should be amended to prohibit betting on all greyhound races, anywhere. The sponsors of the bill agree that this would be a friendly amendment. To ensure there is no sports wagering on greyhound races anywhere, we ask that you adopt the following amendment on page 17 in section 17 JJ2. And I think you have my written testimony, so I'm just going to paraphrase what it does. It simply strikes reference to the Kansas Parimutuel Racing Act. And by doing that, it broadens the prohibition so that there would be no sports wagering on greyhound racing anywhere. In closing, we respectfully request that you adopt this amendment to Senate Bill 84. Please note that in 2020 session, we requested this very same amendment for a similar bill.
You're on mute. Terry, you've been on mute.
Where did I lose you? I'm sorry.
About a minute ago.
Okay, well then let me just back up because it's fast. So our point here is this, that Senate Bill 84, as written, only excludes greyhound racing that would occur in Kansas and is regulated by the Kansas Parimutuel Racing Act. So we're asking that this committee amend Senate Bill 84 in a way that it would prohibit sports wagering anywhere. And you should have my written testimony. And the amendment that we're seeking is on page 17 in section 17, JJ2. And I want to paraphrase what our amendment would do. Essentially, it would strike reference to the Kansas Parimutuel Racing Act. And what that means then is that it would prohibit sports wagering on greyhound races anywhere by simply striking reference to that act. So in closing, we respectfully request that you amend Senate Bill 84 as I've just described to you, and prohibit betting on greyhound racing anywhere. Please note that in the 2020 legislative session, we requested this very same amendment for Senate Bill 283, and it was adopted by the Senate Federal and State Affairs Committee at that time. So I thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Terry. Are there any questions? Yes, Senator Faust-Godot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Terry. So you're saying that if the amendment that you're offering or suggesting, if it goes on, then you're supportive of Senate Bill 84?
What I am suggesting is that we will become neutral, because at that point, we won't be taking any position on sports wagering. So I hope that helps.
Hey, Terry, in our previous testimony and also meetings on this bill, we have identified, and this is on JJ1, I think it's the same area which you were referencing, sports events. Let's see if it, let's go to 2 under that. It said sporting event does not include any greyhound race that is subject to KSA 748801. So it does not include, a sporting event does not include a greyhound race. So that would take care of it in Kansas. I asked our research and our revisers, does that mean that they could bet on a greyhound race in New Jersey? Mm-hmm. And according to the revisers, a greyhound race is not a sporting event. Therefore, the answer is no. So I believe with that interpretation, we can clarify that again in just a moment. We'll call Jason back up here. But with that interpretation, I do not believe this amendment is necessary to satisfy your requirement.
So, Senator, I appreciate you raising this, because I did hear this discussion yesterday when I was listening in. And since that time, I have spoken or communicated with Jason Long about this. And I think that it is important to ask him, but I think we are in agreement that this amendment is needed to clarify that matter, because our legal counsel's interpretation is that the Parimutuel Racing Act, that this prohibition that you have here would only apply to greyhound races that are regulated by the Kansas Parimutuel Racing Act. And for example, there's only, I think, 2, maybe 3 active tracks left in the United States. There is one in Iowa, for example, and our legal counsel doesn't believe that it would prohibit a Kansas resident from sports wagering on a race in another state or on another continent, because the reach of the Kansas Parimutuel Racing Act is narrow. It just applies to Kansas, but that's our general counsel's view. But I think Jason Long could speak to this as well.
Okay, we will ask Jason to give an opinion, but probably not at this time. So we'll move on to our second. Are there any other questions for Terry? Seeing none, thank you, Terry. And we're going to move on to our last opponent, and that is Jason Watkins of the Ruffin Companies. Jason, are you online?
I am, sir.
Go ahead. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jason Watkins appearing for the Ruffin Companies and Kansans for Fair Play. Do appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony in opposition to Senate Bill 84. Our opposition, though, is very narrowly focused, and it relates to the fact that Senate Bill 84, while it allows lottery gaming facility managers or casinos to offer sports wagering, it does not allow racetrack gaming facility managers or the tracks. We think that is an odd exclusion. Senate Bill 66 that was passed back in 2007. I apologize, I just looked at my testimony and it says 2006. That's a typo. Allowed for 4 gaming zones, and in those 4 gaming zones, casinos are allowed. In 3 of those gaming zones, tracks are allowed. And both are allowed to offer various types of gaming and wagering. So we think that Senate Bill 84 should include the tracks. I would point out that Senate Bill 84 goes as far as to have an allowance for Indian tribes and sports wagering at a soccer stadium and a NASCAR track in Wyandotte County, but again, excludes the racetracks. I would say very quickly, I know that there may be opponents that would say, well, why would you include the racetracks in sports wagering? None of them are open right now. And that's true, but we would respectfully submit to the committee that pari-mutuel tracks are allowed in 3 of the state's 4 gaming zones, as I mentioned earlier. Voters in 2 of those zones voted to allow slots at those racetracks. Those racetracks are not open right now, though, because we pay almost twice the amount of tax on profits from those slots that the casinos pay. We're required to pay 40%, they pay 22%. That's led to a situation where the tracks cannot operate at a profit, and they're closed today. But we're eternal optimists, and we trust that at some point the Kansas legislature is going to do the right thing, and they're going to put some parity back into that system. When the legislature does that, they will realize hundreds of new high-paying jobs and millions in new revenue for the state. And when those tracks reopen, because the legislature takes that action, those tracks should be able to offer sports wagering. So again, Mr. Chairman, our opposition is very narrowly focused. The part of the bill that we have disagreement with, it's a very simple fix, and we'd respectfully request that the committee just add in racetrack gaming facility managers to this bill, and we would support it. And then at that point, hope that you would pass it out. I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Jason. Is there any questions for Jason? Yes, Senator Pals-Cadell.
Thank you, Jason Watkins. I was there in 07 when we passed Senate Bill 66 over in the House of Representatives. So 2 questions. So we also, and maybe Jason Long or someone can help me with this, but so we also passed legislation since I've been in the Senate to kind of exclude the Greyhound Park until, was it 2030 or something of that nature from, well, and most of us know kind of what that was about, but so, but can you speak to this? Are you specifically saying that when because I'm always torn because I live in the area where the Greyhound Park is, there in Sedgwick County in Wichita. So tracks or slot machines or, I mean, specifically, what are you addressing? So if you were, the point that you just made, if it was added in, then are you talking about greyhound, dogs, racing? Specifically, describe what you would want again.
Well, today, and thank you for the question, today, all we're asking the committee to do is include racetrack gaming facility managers or in short, the racetracks, to be able to offer sports wagering. The point that I was making towards the end of my testimony is that, yes, the tracks are not open right now. And that's not an issue that you can address today in this bill. I think there are actions that the legislature could take in the future that would allow those tracks to reopen. As I pointed out, the casinos have a 22% revenue share on the profits from slots, and the tracks have a 40%. They're not able to operate at a profit at that margin, and so they're closed. So at some point, and I don't want to get off track, Mr. Chairman, I respect the focus of the committee, but at some point, we are going to ask the legislature to take a look at that, as well as some other issues related to the operations of tracks in Kansas. If the legislature would take certain actions relevant to what I just mentioned, those tracks would be able to open back up. And when they do, they ought to be able to offer sports wagering. We wouldn't want to have to come back and say, okay, now you took the necessary steps. We've created all these jobs. We've got hundreds of millions of dollars in capital investment. There's tax revenue coming into the state. Oh, but by the way, can you now please add us to be allowed to offer sports wagering? The legislature and this committee should just take that step if and when they work Senate Bill 84.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Jason. We appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
At this time, is there any questions or anybody in the audience that is an opponent that would like to testify? Seeing none. Are there any questions from the committee? At this time, we plan to work this. I do not have a, let me check the date. We do plan to work this bill. This is in the 17th and 18th. Oh. February 24th. We do plan to work this bill on February 24th. So I do know that there's probably some amendments coming, so let's make sure we get our amendments coming and get them turned in. So thank you very much. And if there's nothing further for the